Okay, so get this. You sent over this research paper,
Mm-hmm.
bridging the data provenance gap across text, speech, and video. And
Yeah.
it's about AI training data sets. And it's
Mhm.
actually pretty important stuff, like
Oh, yeah.
think of training data sets as the fuel that
Yeah.
powers all those amazing AI models that we hear about all the time.
Yeah, it's kind of wild how much data actually goes into training these AIs.
Right.
We're not just talking like a few books here and there. We're talking trillions of words, millions of hours of audio and video.
That's incredible.
This paper is a huge audit, like almost 4,000 data sets, and it really kind of highlights some big changes in how AI is being trained these days.
So it's not just the amount of data,
Yeah.
it's where it's coming from.
Exactly.
This paper shows a huge shift
Yeah.
towards using stuff from the web,
Mhm.
social media, and
Yeah.
even synthetically generated data.
You got it. And I think this shift is mainly driven by the sheer volume of data that's needed
Mm.
and how easy it is to access. To
Mm.
get these large language models to work,
Yeah.
you need a massive amount of data. And, the web offers this
Yeah.
constantly updated, easily accessible source,
Yeah.
especially platforms like YouTube.
Okay, YouTube. So let's talk about that for a second. That seems like a potential minefield
Oh, yeah.
when it comes to things like copyright.
That is a very, very hot topic right now.
Yeah.
The paper mentions
Yeah.
several lawsuits
Hmm.
that content creators have filed against AI developers
Oh, wow.
because they claim that their YouTube videos were used without permission
Yeah.
to train these models.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's really a tough spot
Yeah.
trying to find that balance
Right.
between meeting really diverse data sets,
Mhm.
but also making sure that the creator's rights are respected.
You've probably heard of, AI creating art or writing, but now get this, it's actually being used to create data to train other AI.
All right.
This synthetic data is becoming super popular.
Yeah, it's definitely a growing trend.
Mm-hmm. Is that a sustainable solution, do you think?
It's hard to say right now. It's growing, particularly when it comes to text data.
Right.
Just a few years ago, synthetic text data was basically unheard of.
Right.
But this paper shows that it's now a significant chunk of what's being used.
Oh.
Whether it's sustainable or not,
Yeah.
that remains to be seen.
It might help with some issues like copyright, but it could also lead to new problems that we haven't even considered yet.
Yeah, it's almost like we've stumbled into some uncharted territory.
It really is.
And this leads us to another thing that the paper talks about, data licenses and use restrictions.
Right.
That sounds like a legal nightmare waiting to happen.
It's almost like signing a contract without really knowing all the terms. You might think you're using data that's okay for commercial use.
Right.
But the paper found that over 80% of the content they looked at had hidden restrictions
Oh, really?
buried deep in the source material.
So developers could be breaking the rules without even knowing it.
That's exactly right. That is a recipe for trouble.
Big time.
Wow.
Yeah.
So more transparency would
Oh,
prevent
yeah.
some headaches down the road.
I couldn't agree more. The researchers are really pushing for better documentation
Yeah.
and clearer guidelines to help everyone navigate these really complicated legal situations.
Right. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So let's switch gears a little bit
Okay.
and talk about something else the paper brought up. Geographical and linguistic representation in data sets.
Yeah. Imagine trying to build a translator,
Mm-hmm.
like a global translator,
Yeah.
but only using books from like a handful of countries.
Right.
That's kind of what's happening right now with AI training data.
Okay.
The
Okay.
paper shows that there's a huge amount of data coming from North America
Mm-hmm.
and Europe.
Mhm.
But places like Africa and South America, they contribute less than 0.2%.
0.2%.
Yeah.
Wow. We are a long way from having data that represents the whole world.
We really are.
Yeah.
And even though, we're seeing more languages represented overall,
Right.
the data still leans heavily towards certain regions and certain languages. And this raises a concern
Yeah.
about whether AI will actually benefit everybody equally,
Right.
or if it will just reflect the perspectives of, a select few.
So if we want to create AI that's truly inclusive
Yeah,
and represents everybody,
absolutely.
we need to make sure that data is coming from all over the world,
Mm.
not just, a few places who's creating all these data sets.
Well, the paper found that universities,
Okay.
nonprofits, and industry labs, they're kind of the main players,
Mm.
at least for the publicly available data.
So what does that mean for the future of AI? Is this good? Is this bad?
It's a really good question. It's kind of a mixed bag, to be honest. On the one hand, these institutions often have the expertise and the resources
Yeah.
to build these massive, high-quality data sets.
Mm.
But this concentration of power could also lead to some unintended biases.
Right.
And it could make it harder for researchers who are outside of these institutions to really get access to the data they need.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's definitely something to keep an eye on as AI keeps evolving.
For sure.
Yeah. It's interesting to see how the sources of data have changed over time.
Right.
The paper actually kind of takes a look back and shows how things have evolved, and it's pretty surprising.
Yeah. You mentioned YouTube as being like a major source for speech and video data now, but it wasn't always that way.
No, not at all.
Right.
Before 2018, it was a completely different landscape.
Okay.
Speech data was primarily coming from places like calling platforms,
Okay.
audiobooks, even content that was directly gathered from people.
Right. Right.
And then for video, it was movies and carefully curated image data sets.
Yeah.
From sites like Flickr. Those were like the go-to sources.
So this reliance on internet video is a relatively new thing then?
Yeah, it really is.
What caused that shift?
Well, I think, a lot of it has to do with just the explosion of user-generated content on platforms like YouTube. I mean, it's just this massive and constantly growing source of, diverse real-world data that's readily available.
Yeah.
And for AI developers who are looking to train their models on a really large scale,
Yeah.
it's like striking gold.
But as we talked about, that convenience also comes with a whole bunch of legal and ethical challenges.
Absolutely.
The paper goes into detail about, the inconsistencies between the data set licenses and the actual restrictions on the source material.
Yeah, and a lot of those restrictions, they're buried, deep within the terms of service of these platforms. And most developers probably don't even realize they're agreeing to them when they're scraping this data.
So many legal headaches.
Oh, yeah.
Just waiting to happen.
Big time, yeah. And that's why the researchers who wrote the paper are really pushing for this more transparency. And standardized documentation practices to address this.
It makes sense.
They argue it's absolutely crucial for promoting responsible AI development.
And this lack of transparency, it goes beyond just web and social media data, right?
That's right.
The paper also mentions challenges with licensing and restrictions, even with synthetic data.
That's true. Even though synthetic data is generated by AI, the models that are used to create that data, they often have their own licensing restrictions.
Right.
For example, a lot of the language models, especially those from OpenAI, they have clauses that prohibit their output from being used commercially.
Interesting.
Or to develop competing AI models.
So even when you're dealing with artificially created data, there are still legal hoops to jump through.
There are. It can get pretty complicated.
Yeah.
And that's why it's just so important for developers to be aware of these issues and to really choose their data sources carefully.
The paper emphasizes that building ethical and responsible AI requires understanding not just the algorithms, but also the entire data pipeline.
Right.
From sourcing and licensing to pre-processing and annotation.
It's like baking a cake. You need to know, not just the recipe, but where the ingredients come from and how to handle them properly.
Yeah. And that's particularly important when we think about the paper's findings on geographic and linguistic representation.
Absolutely, yeah.
That really stood out to me. The fact that organizations from Africa and South America contribute such a tiny percentage of the data used to train AI, that's a huge red flag.
And what's even more interesting is that this imbalance has been around for a while.
Really?
The paper shows that geographical representation has pretty much stayed the same for over a decade.
Wow.
So despite all the talk about diversity and inclusion in AI, the data landscape hasn't really changed all that much.
That's really disheartening.
It is.
Yeah, it suggests that we're still a long way from making sure that AI truly reflects the incredible diversity of the world's population.
Yeah, and it's not just about representation for the sake of it.
Right.
This lack of balance has real-world consequences.
Of course.
If AI models are mostly trained on data from, a small part of humanity, they're likely to just continue to perpetuate existing biases and inequalities.
It's like the old saying, garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly.
If we feed AI biased data, we're going to get biased results.
And those biased results can have a real impact on people's lives.
Absolutely.
Everything from influencing hiring decisions to shaping the information they see online. This paper really makes a strong case for why data provenance is so important. It's not just, some technical detail. It's really at the core of creating fair, ethical, and responsible AI.
It's like the foundation of a house.
Yeah.
If the foundation's weak, the whole structure's at risk.
Absolutely. The choices we make about the data that we use have this huge impact.
Yeah.
We need to be much more mindful and deliberate about how we source, curate, and use this data that is essentially shaping the future of AI.
And speaking of choices, let's talk about who is actually taking the lead in creating these data sets. I was surprised to see that universities play such a big role, especially for speech and video data.
Yeah. The paper found that universities, along with nonprofits and industry labs, they're really behind the majority of the data sets that are publicly available.
So does that give them a lot of influence over the direction of AI development?
It's definitely something to think about.
Yeah.
This concentration of power, it could potentially limit the range of perspectives that are represented in the data.
Right.
And it could also create barriers for researchers who are outside of these institutions, who want to contribute to the field.
It's like having a small group of people decide what everybody gets to learn.
Right.
Yeah, it could really stifle innovation and limit the potential of AI.
It could. And, the paper also points out that the reasons for creating these data sets can be very different.
Okay.
Some are created with very specific research goals in mind, while others are meant to be more general purpose.
Okay.
So understanding the motivations behind a data set can help us to really assess its potential biases and limitations.
It's like knowing the author's perspective when you're reading a book.
Exactly.
Right. It helps you interpret the information.
It does.
More critically.
Yeah. And speaking of biases, the paper really emphasizes the importance of carefully examining data for potential biases.
Yeah.
Even when it's coming from seemingly neutral sources like encyclopedias.
You'd think that data from like Wikipedia would be pretty objective.
Yeah. You would think so.
Yeah.
But even those sources, they can reflect the biases of the people who contribute to them and edit them.
It's a good reminder that no data source is perfectly neutral.
No.
We always need to approach data with a critical eye.
Absolutely.
Regardless of where it comes from.
It's like being a detective.
Right.
You have to examine the evidence carefully and look for those clues that might reveal hidden biases.
And that's especially crucial when we consider the potential for AI to amplify existing societal biases.
Exactly.
Which brings us back to, the whole issue of social media data.
Right.
I mean, it is a treasure trove of information.
It is.
But it's also full of, biases, misinformation, potentially harmful content.
The paper suggests that depending too heavily on social media data could result in AI models that reflect the negative aspects of online culture.
Yeah.
So if we're not careful, we could end up with AI that perpetuates stereotypes, spreads false information, and even encourages hate speech.
It's like training AI on the worst parts of the internet. Not exactly a recipe for a positive future.
Not at all. And that's why the authors of the paper, they advocate for a more balanced approach, one that really recognizes both the value and the risks of using social media data.
Right.
And they stress the importance of developing really strong methods for filtering out harmful content and mitigating potential biases.
So it's this tough balancing act.
Yeah. You want to take advantage of the richness and diversity of social media data, but you also need to use it responsibly and ethically.
Absolutely. So that kind of brings us to one of the most, thought-provoking questions that this paper raises. How do we balance the need for these large, diverse data sets with the ethical and legal requirements of responsible AI development?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is, it's a complex issue. It is with no easy answers.
No, it's a conversation we need to have as a society.
Right.
And it needs to involve everyone from AI developers and researchers to policymakers, ethicists, and the general public.
So this paper really, really highlights the importance of this conversation.
It does. It shines a light on all those hidden complexities of data provenance.
Yeah.
And it underscores just how crucial it is to address these issues head on.
Yeah.
If we really want to create AI that benefits all of humanity.
This has been a really insightful deep dive so far.
Yeah.
It has really got me thinking about all of this.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to hear your final thoughts on what this means for the future of AI.
Okay.
And what steps we can take to move forward responsibly. It really does. It throws down a challenge. It makes us look beyond, all the hype around AI and really grapple with the less glamorous side of things. Like,
Right.
Where's the data coming from, and how does that actually impact
Right.
the technology we're building?
It's like we've been so busy building this amazing car
Yeah.
that we haven't stopped to think about the fuel, who controls it,
Right.
or what it's doing to the environment.
That's a great analogy. Yeah.
And the paper offers some concrete steps that we can take to address these issues. It really emphasizes this need for more transparency
Absolutely.
and standardization in how we document and license data sets.
Right. I mean, developers need really clear and consistent information about what they can and can't do with this data.
Yeah.
And that includes not just the intended use cases, but also, where the data came from, the licensing terms for both the data set and the original sources.
Right.
Any potential restrictions related to copyright or privacy.
It's like we need to create a universal language for data.
Yeah.
So that everybody's on the same page and can easily understand what the rules are.
And the paper also suggests, going beyond just listing the license for a data set and providing much more specific details about those source materials.
So instead of just saying like, oh, this data set is licensed under Creative Commons.
Yeah. You would also include information like, this data set includes text from Wikipedia and images from Flickr, each under their own licensing terms.
Exactly. That kind of detail would really empower developers to make more informed decisions and avoid potential legal trouble down the road.
Yeah.
It also promotes greater accountability and transparency in the field as a whole.
It seems like a no-brainer.
It really does.
But the paper also acknowledges that just having these technical solutions isn't enough.
You're right. We need a bigger shift in the overall culture of AI development, where ethical considerations are just as important as those technical advancements.
Yeah.
And that means, raising awareness about data provenance issues, developing really strong ethical guidelines, and establishing really clear accountability mechanisms.
So it's about moving away from that, move fast and break things mentality and taking a more cautious and thoughtful approach. That acknowledges the potential impact that this technology has on society.
And that cultural shift needs to happen everywhere.
Yeah.
From individual developers and researchers to the big corporations and government institutions.
It's a collective responsibility.
It is.
We all play a role in this. And, the paper also highlights the importance of education and training, and promoting ethical AI development.
Absolutely. It's crucial to equip that next generation of AI developers and researchers with a really solid understanding of these issues.
Yeah.
It can't be an afterthought. It needs to be a fundamental part of their education.
They need to understand not just the how of building AI, but also the why and the who.
Exactly.
Why are we building these systems and who are they ultimately serving?
That's such a good point. It's about fostering this sense of responsibility.
Yeah.
And empowering them to make decisions that really consider that bigger picture.
And this education needs to happen not just in universities, but within companies and government agencies as well.
Absolutely. It's about creating this culture of awareness and accountability across that entire AI ecosystem.
That's the goal. And the paper also recommends diversifying data sources to address those geographical and linguistic biases that we were talking about earlier.
And it's definitely concerning that certain regions are so underrepresented in the data. We need to really actively work to correct that imbalance. And that means not only collecting more data from these underrepresented areas, but also making sure that it's properly curated and annotated.
It's about quality, not just quantity.
Absolutely.
We need to make sure that the data accurately reflects the diversity of cultures, languages, and perspectives, around the world.
And to do this effectively, we need to collaborate and partner with those local communities. It's about ensuring that they're actively involved in the process and that their voices are heard.
Building trust and making sure that AI development is truly inclusive and benefits everyone. That's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
This paper really lays out a roadmap.
It does.
For a more responsible and ethical approach to AI.
It's a call to action.
It is.
For everyone to take these issues seriously and work together to create a future where AI truly serves humanity.
I completely agree. It's a reminder that the decisions we make today are going to shape the future of this technology. We have a responsibility to create a future that we can all be proud of.
Absolutely.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive.
It has.
It's definitely given me a lot to think about.
Yeah, me too.
I'm left with a sense of both the incredible possibilities of AI and the critical need to proceed with caution and care.
Yeah.
So what are your final thoughts?
For me, it just reinforces the importance of staying informed and engaged in these conversations. The choices we make about data, they'll have a profound impact.
Right.
And we all have a role to play in shaping a positive future with AI.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been great.
It's been a real eye-opener. I encourage everyone listening to check out the research paper for themselves.
Yeah, definitely.
Little links in the show notes.
For sure.
And until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring.
Absolutely.
And keep pushing for a better future with AI.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And don't forget to share your thoughts on this topic with us.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
We'd love to hear what you think. We'll see you on the next deep dive.
See you then.